Welcome to Barbara's Bulletin, the podcast where we bring you the latest news and updates from around the world. We're starting off with a story that highlights the human impact of immigration policies on various communities. The Trump administration's decision to terminate Temporary Protected Status, or TPS, for over 300 Haitians and 6,000 Syrians has been making its way through the courts. The Supreme Court recently heard arguments on whether the administration properly ended TPS for these groups. TPS was initially granted to Haitians in 2010 after a devastating earthquake, and to Syrians in 2012 due to armed conflict. The designations have been renewed multiple times since then. However, the Trump administration argues that TPS is meant to be temporary, not a de facto amnesty program. The case has significant implications for the affected communities, as well as for the healthcare industry. Many TPS holders work as caregivers and nursing assistants, providing essential support to elderly Americans. In fact, according to the immigration advocacy group FWD.US, over 20,000 Haitian TPS holders work in these roles. We spoke to Rita Siebenaler, an 82-year-old advocate who has been speaking out about the need for immigrant workers, including caregivers with temporary protected status. She emphasized the importance of these workers in caring for America's aging population, saying, "As you age, in spite of your good habits, your bodies fail. Some assistance, of course, comes from families. But often that assistance comes from the caretakers." Siebenaler also highlighted the challenges faced by long-term care facilities, which are already struggling to find qualified staff. She noted that immigrants often bring a unique perspective and cultural values that prioritize caring for the elderly. As the Supreme Court deliberates on this case, it's essential to consider the human impact of immigration policies on various communities. We'll continue to follow this story and provide updates as more information becomes available. We'll be right back with more of today's top news on Barbara's Bulletin. Welcome back to Barbara's Bulletin. We're diving into the latest developments from the European Union, where several key stories have caught our attention. First, let's take a look at the EU's efforts to mitigate the impact of the Iran energy crisis on its member states. The EU has temporarily loosened state aid rules, allowing governments to subsidize energy costs for small businesses, farmers, and heavy industry. This move aims to cushion those most affected by the economic blow of the conflict in the Middle East. Under the new package, governments can cover up to 70% of extra fuel and fertilizer costs for agriculture, fisheries, and transport operators, compared to pre-crisis price levels, up to €50,000. Energy-intensive industries will also benefit from a higher ceiling on electricity cost subsidies, raised from 50% to 70% of eligible consumption. However, some critics argue that the EU Commission's potential allowance for subsidies for gas-fired power generation may run counter to the bloc's goals to reduce fossil fuel use. Italy has already moved in this direction by reimbursing carbon costs for gas power plants, which could increase gas demand in the country by 7%. In other news, the European Parliament has taken a step towards establishing an ethics body designed to set minimum ethics standards across 8 different EU institutions. The amendment, passed with a razor-thin margin, demands that Parliament comply without any further delay, although its actual establishment remains uncertain. Lastly, we're seeing developments in the EU's energy transition efforts, with Executive Vice President Teresa Ribera highlighting the crisis as an opportunity to accelerate the shift towards renewables, particularly electric vehicles. Battery electric vehicle registrations across the EU rose 48.9% in March compared to last year, according to the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. As we continue to monitor these unfolding stories, it's clear that the EU is navigating complex challenges and opportunities. We'll be keeping a close eye on how these developments unfold and what they might mean for the future of the bloc. Welcome back to Barbara's Bulletin. As we wrap up today's show, let's take a closer look at the ongoing situation with the Strait of Hormuz and its impact on global energy markets. The blockade, which began on April 13th, has forced Persian Gulf oil producers to cut production by roughly 6% due to local storage facilities reaching capacity. This has resulted in about 13 million barrels per day of global oil supply being shuttered, according to the International Energy Agency. The IEA also reports that over 80 energy facilities have been damaged during the conflict, and a recovery could take as long as 2 years. OPEC Plus had planned to boost its crude output by 206,000 barrels per day in May, but this production hike now seems unlikely given the current circumstances. In fact, OPEC's March crude production fell by 7.56 million barrels per day to a 35-year low of 22.05 million barrels per day. It's worth noting that the United Arab Emirates' decision to leave OPEC on May 1st could potentially allow the country to boost its production, as it will no longer be constrained by OPEC's output quotas. However, it's unclear how this will play out in the context of the ongoing blockade and global energy crisis. As we consider the implications of these developments, it's essential to remember that the situation is complex and multifaceted. The ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, as well as the new US and EU sanctions on Russian oil companies, infrastructure, and tankers, are also contributing factors to the global energy landscape. In conclusion, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and its far-reaching consequences serve as a reminder of the interconnectedness of global energy markets. As we move forward, it's crucial to stay informed and adapt to the evolving situation. That's all for today's Barbara's Bulletin. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, stay engaged.